The morning began like any other workday inside the tall glass building. The lobby was already busy before sunrise. People in suits walked quickly, holding phones and coffee cups, their faces serious and tired. Elevators opened and closed every few seconds. Screens on the walls showed numbers, charts, and news headlines. Everything in the building moved fast except one person. She arrived quietly through the service entrance at the back. Her uniform was clean but simple. She tied her hair neatly, checked her apron, and took a deep breath before stepping inside. This was just another shift for her. She had worked many places like this before. Big buildings, important people, long days, and short breaks. She never expected anything more than finishing her work and going home. That morning, a major meeting was planned on the top floor. It involved senior leaders of the company, people who rarely spoke to anyone outside their circle. The company was facing a huge problem. Everyone knew it, even those who were not supposed to. Whispers about losses, delays, and failed plans floated through the halls. Some said the company was losing money every single day. Others said investors were nervous. No one spoke clearly, but the tension could be felt everywhere. The catering team was told to be extra careful. The meeting would last hours. Coffee had to be hot. Water glasses could never be empty. No mistakes. The waitress listened carefully as the supervisor gave instructions. She nodded, said nothing, and took her place with the others. She had learned long ago that staying quiet made work easier. As they prepared trays and carts, voices echoed from the hallway outside the meeting room. Even before the doors opened, raised tones could be heard. Someone sounded angry. Someone else sounded frustrated. This was not a normal meeting. She noticed this, but she kept moving, focused on her task. When the doors finally opened, the size of the room surprised her, even though she had seen many like it before. A long table stretched across the center. Screens covered one entire wall, showing complex charts and lines that moved every few seconds. Chairs filled quickly with executives. Some rubbed their temples. Others stared at their screens. The air felt heavy. She entered with a tray of coffee cups. As she placed them carefully, she heard pieces of conversation without trying to listen. Numbers were mentioned again and again. Large numbers. Someone said a project had failed. Another said fixing it would cost too much. Someone else blamed the system. A voice near the front said the loss could reach 100 million if nothing changed. Her hand paused for just a moment as she heard that. 100 million. It was a number she could barely imagine. To her, that amount could change thousands of lives. But in that room, it was spoken like a heavy burden, not a miracle. She moved on, but her mind stayed alert. The charts on the screen caught her attention. Not because they were colorful, but because they reminded her of something familiar. Patterns, gaps, numbers that did not fully make sense. She did not stop to study them. She was not supposed to. Still, something felt off. The meeting grew louder as time passed. Coffee cups emptied quickly. She returned again and again, each time hearing more fragments. Words like delay, miscalculation, forecast error, and supply mismatch floated through the air. Each time she passed the screen, she noticed the same section of the chart being pointed at. Again and again, they focused on the same place. She felt a quiet pull inside her. A strange feeling she had not felt in years. It was the feeling of understanding something before others did, even when she did not yet have the full picture. She pushed it away at first. This was not her place. She was there to serve, not to think. During a short pause in the meeting, when voices dropped and people leaned back in their chairs, she stood near the side, waiting in case someone needed water. The screen froze on a table of numbers. Her eyes moved across it without effort. Rows, columns, percentages. Something about the timing did not match the outcome they were describing. Her heart beat a little faster. She recognized the mistake. Not fully, not yet, but enough to feel sure it existed. It was not a complex error. It was simple. Too simple. That was why it was dangerous. She swallowed and looked down at her tray. Her mind argued with itself. Who was she to notice this? These people had degrees, experience, titles. They had teams working under them. If there was a mistake, surely they would have seen it. But the feeling would not leave her. It grew stronger as the discussion resumed. One executive said the numbers made no sense anymore. Another said they had checked them 3 times. Someone suggested cutting jobs. Someone else suggested shutting down a whole department. Her fingers tightened around the tray handle. She felt uneasy. The solution forming in her mind did not involve cuts or shutdowns. It involved timing, a small shift, a detail so basic that it was almost embarrassing to point out. She told herself to stay quiet. She had learned that lesson the hard way in life. Speaking up often came with consequences. Being invisible was safer. But then she heard the voice at the head of the table. Calm, controlled but clearly stressed. The person leading the meeting said they had one last hour to decide. If they failed, the damage would be permanent. That was when she realized this was not just a meeting. This was a breaking point. She felt a wave of memories rush in. Long nights studying. Notes written by hand. Problems solved slowly, carefully. A different life she once imagined for herself. A path she had been forced to leave behind, not because she lacked skill, but because life had other plans. She stood still, her mind racing. The room was silent for a moment as everyone looked at the screen. No one spoke. The numbers stayed frozen. She took a small step forward without realizing it. Then she stopped. Her face felt warm. She was suddenly aware of where she was standing and who surrounded her. Her place was near the wall, not the table. A request broke the silence. Someone asked for fresh coffee. The moment passed. She turned back toward the door, reminding herself of her role. She could not change anything here. This was not her world. Yet as she poured coffee into cups, her mind kept returning to the same thought. The same small error. The same clear answer. It would take seconds to explain. Seconds that could save months of damage. She carried the tray back into the room. Her expression was calm, but inside, she felt torn. The people at the table leaned forward again, voices rising. Frustration filled the air. She placed a cup near the edge of the table and heard someone say, "Nothing adds up anymore." Without meaning to, she looked up at the screen once more. And in that moment she knew. She knew exactly where the problem was. She also knew that speaking would change everything, or ruin it. She took a slow breath, standing there with a tray in her hands, caught between silence and truth. As the room waited for an answer it did not know was standing just a few steps away. The meeting did not slow down after that moment. In fact, it became more intense. Voices overlapped. Someone stood up and began pointing at the screen. Another person shook their head in disbelief. Papers were pushed across the table. The tension was thick enough to feel. She stood near the wall, holding her tray, trying to steady her thoughts. Her heart was beating faster than usual. She kept telling herself to move away, to return to the kitchen, to stay invisible like always. But her eyes kept drifting back to the screen. The same numbers, the same timeline, the same mistake. One executive spoke loudly, saying the data proved the plan could not work. Another argued that changing direction now would only make things worse. A third suggested bringing in outside consultants, even though it would cost millions more. No one seemed confident. Everyone looked tired. She took a step back, then another. Just as she turned toward the door, a quiet voice from the table cut through the noise. "Can someone explain why the delay keeps growing even when output increased?" The question hung in the air. No one answered right away. Fingers tapped on laptops. A few people avoided eye contact. She stopped walking. That question touched the exact point she had been thinking about. It was the heart of the problem. She felt a small shock run through her. They were close, yet still missing it. Her grip tightened around the tray. Her mind raced through the numbers again, quickly, clearly. The answer formed easily, like finishing a sentence she had already started. She knew what she was risking. Speaking up could get her removed from the room, could cost her the job. Worse, it could embarrass her if she was wrong. But what if she was right? She slowly turned back toward the table. Her voice felt stuck in her throat. She waited, hoping someone else would speak first. No one did. The silence grew uncomfortable. Without fully planning it, she spoke. "Excuse me," she said softly. Several heads turned at once. Some faces showed surprise. Others showed irritation. A few looked confused, as if they had not noticed her standing there before. She immediately felt small. Her uniform suddenly felt too visible. Her voice sounded louder than she expected in the quiet room. "I'm sorry," she added quickly. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Someone near the end of the table frowned. Another person sighed. The person leading the meeting raised a hand slightly, signaling for calm. "What is it?" they asked, their tone controlled but firm. She swallowed. There was no turning back now. "I might be mistaken," she said, choosing her words carefully. "But I think the delay is growing because the output increase is being measured against the wrong cycle." The room froze. A few people exchanged looks. One executive leaned back in their chair. Another raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" someone asked. She took a breath. Her hands trembled slightly, but her mind was steady. "The numbers assume the supply moves weekly," she continued. "But the processing shift you made last quarter changed that to a daily flow. The system still treats it like the old cycle, so every increase creates overlap instead of speed." No one spoke. She pointed gently toward the screen, careful not to step too far forward. "That's why output went up, but delays did too. The timing isn't aligned." For a moment nothing happened. Then chairs moved. One person leaned closer to the screen. Another began typing quickly. Someone whispered, "Check that." The person leading the meeting stared at the chart, then at her. "Where did you get that understanding?" they asked. She hesitated. This was the question she feared. "I studied similar systems before," she said honestly. "A few years ago." Someone scoffed quietly. "And you're working as service staff now?" Another voice asked, not unkindly, but clearly doubtful. She nodded. "Yes." The room filled with quiet murmurs. One executive shook their head. "We've reviewed this data for weeks," they said. "If it were that simple, we would have seen it." She felt her cheeks warm. "Sometimes simple things hide in plain sight," she replied, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. The person leading the meeting raised a hand again. "Let's verify it," they said. The screen changed. Numbers shifted. A new calculation ran. Seconds passed. Then more seconds. Someone's eyes widened. Another person leaned forward sharply. "Run it again," they said. The calculation ran a second time. The room went silent. The delay line dropped. Not a little. A lot. The projected loss number changed. Someone whispered, "That's not possible." But it was. The person leading the meeting slowly stood up. They walked closer to the screen, staring at the updated data. "How much does this reduce the loss?" they asked. A voice answered from near the middle of the table. "If implemented immediately, nearly all of it." The words hung in the air. Nearly all of it. 100 million. Several people turned to look at her again. This time their expressions were different. No irritation. No doubt. Shock. She stood very still, unsure what to do with her hands. She felt exposed, like a light had suddenly been turned on. The person leading the meeting looked directly at her. "Can you explain the fix clearly?" they asked. She nodded slowly. "Yes." She spoke carefully, breaking it down step by step. She avoided technical terms when possible. She explained it the way she once learned to explain things, simply so anyone could follow. As she spoke, heads nodded. Pens moved. Notes were taken. Someone interrupted once, asking a question. She answered calmly. Another person asked how long it would take to adjust the system. She gave an estimate. The disbelief in the room slowly turned into focus. When she finished, no one spoke for a moment. Then the person leading the meeting said, "Stay here." They turned to the rest of the table. "We're adjusting the plan." She felt a strange mix of emotions wash over her. Relief, fear, pride, uncertainty. She was no longer invisible, and there was no going back. As the meeting resumed with new energy, she stood near the table, no longer just a waitress passing through. She had changed the direction of the room, and everyone knew it. The room felt different now. The anger and confusion that once filled the air had been replaced by sharp focus. People were no longer arguing. They were thinking. Screens refreshed again and again. Messages were sent. Calls were made quietly from the corners of the room. She stood near the table, unsure where she belonged. No one asked her to leave. No one told her to sit. She simply remained there, hands folded, trying to stay calm. Her legs felt slightly weak, but she kept her posture steady. A few minutes earlier, she had been just another person blending into the background. Now every movement she made seemed noticed. Someone slid a chair back slightly, as if offering her a place. She hesitated, then slowly sat down at the edge, careful not to take up too much space. Felt strange. The chair was softer than she expected. The table felt farther away than it looked. The person leading the meeting spoke again, asking the team to test the idea across different scenarios. They wanted to be sure. No shortcuts this time. She watched as numbers changed on the screens. Each new test showed the same result. The losses dropped. The delays shortened. The problem that had seemed impossible now looked manageable. A few executives whispered among themselves. One shook their head in disbelief. Another let out a slow breath, as if they had been holding it all morning. Someone finally spoke what everyone was thinking. How did we miss this? No one answered. She looked down at her hands. They were steady now. Her fear had softened into something else. Not confidence exactly, but clarity. One executive turned toward her. You said you studied this kind of system before. Why didn't you pursue it? The question was direct, but not cruel. She paused before answering. Life changed, she said simply. I had responsibilities. I took work where I could. There was no pity in her voice, just truth. The person leading the meeting nodded slowly. So this wasn't luck. She shook her head. No. Another silence followed. This one felt heavier, filled with understanding. The meeting continued, but now she was part of it. People asked her questions directly. They did not talk over her. They listened. When she wasn't sure about something, she said so. When she was sure, she explained why. Time passed quickly. Coffee cups sat untouched. Phones buzzed and were ignored. At one point, someone from another department joined the room, clearly confused about why she was sitting at the table. They whispered a question to a colleague. The colleague replied quietly, and the confusion turned into curiosity. She noticed it all but stayed focused. Then the tone shifted again. One executive leaned back and crossed their arms. Even if this works, they said, we still need to explain why no one caught it earlier. Investors will ask questions. Another nodded. This makes us look careless. The room grew tense once more. She felt that familiar pull again. The urge to speak, balanced by the fear of saying too much. She chose her words carefully. You didn't miss it because you were careless, she said. You missed it because everyone was looking at the problem from the same angle. Several people looked at her. When you're used to a system working one way for years, you stop questioning its timing, she continued. You focus on volume, not flow. The person leading the meeting nodded. That's fair. The executive who had raised the concern exhaled. That's actually something we can explain. A sense of relief spread through the room. Then came the hardest question. What do we do now? Someone asked. The person leading the meeting turned to her again. What would you do? She was not expecting that. She sat up straighter. First, I'd pause the expansion plans for 2 weeks, she said. Not cancel them, just pause. Fix the timing issue across all regions. Train the teams on the new flow, then restart slowly. People began nodding. That would avoid panic, someone said. And reduce risk, another added. The plan started taking shape quickly. As they discussed next steps, she felt something unfamiliar building inside her. Not excitement, responsibility. She realized something important in that moment. If this failed, It would not just be the company's mistake anymore. It would be partly hers. That thought scared her. The meeting moved toward a close. Tasks were assigned. Calls scheduled. Decisions finalized. The person leading the meeting stood and looked around the table. Before we end, they said, there's something we need to address. All eyes turned to her. She felt her chest tighten. You walked into this room as staff, they continued. But you contributed more than anyone here today. The words settled slowly. We can't ignore that. A few people nodded in agreement. One executive spoke up. We should at least know who we're talking to. She understood what they were asking, but she hesitated. Her name did not matter. Her story did. She shared a brief version of it. How she once studied, how she worked hard, how life pulled her in another direction. She did not ask for sympathy. She did not make excuses. The room listened quietly. When she finished, the person leading the meeting said something that changed the tone completely. You shouldn't be carrying trays here. She froze. They raised a hand before she could react. Not because there's anything wrong with honest work, they added, but because your skills belong at the table. Her throat tightened. She did not know what to say. We'll talk after this, they said. For now, thank you. The meeting officially ended. People stood up, gathering their things. Some came over to thank her. Others asked quick questions. A few simply looked at her with respect. She stood slowly, feeling overwhelmed. As the room emptied, she realized how much had changed in just one morning. She had spoken when it mattered, and the world had listened. But she also knew this was not the end. What came next would be even harder. The hallway outside the meeting room felt quieter than before. People walked past more slowly, still processing what had just happened. She stood near the wall, holding her empty tray, unsure where to go next. Part of her wanted to disappear back into the routine she knew. Another part knew that routine was already gone. A voice called out to her. Please wait. She turned. The person who had led the meeting stepped out of the room. Their expression was calm, but serious. Let's talk, they said. They walked a short distance to a small sitting area with glass walls. Inside, the noise of the office felt distant. She sat across from them, hands resting in her lap. For a moment, neither spoke. I want to be clear, the leader said finally. What you did today matters. She nodded, unsure how to respond. We ran the numbers again, they continued. Across every model. Your fix holds. Her chest felt tight. Hearing it confirmed made everything feel more real. There's something I need to understand, the leader said. Why didn't you speak earlier? She looked down. Because no one expects someone like me to have answers like that, she said quietly. And usually they're right. The leader leaned back slightly, absorbing her words. That's on us, they said after a pause. Not on you. They stood and looked through the glass at the busy office. This company nearly lost everything because we listened only to voices that sounded familiar. They turned back to her. I don't want that to happen again. She waited, her heart beating fast. I'm offering you a temporary role, the leader said. Immediate. Paid. You'll work with our operations team to implement the changes. Her breath caught. Temporary? She repeated. Yes, they said. So you can decide if this is something you want. No pressure. She thought about her life outside those walls. Bills. Long shifts. Being tired all the time. Being unseen. I don't have formal credentials anymore, she said. Not on paper. The leader met her eyes. You have something more valuable, they replied. Understanding. She nodded slowly. I'll need time to think, she said. That's fair, the leader answered. But the team needs you today. She agreed. Within the hour, her apron was folded neatly and placed in a locker. She changed into borrowed office clothes. They didn't fit perfectly, but they felt different, like a step into another world. When she returned to the floor, people looked at her differently. Some smiled. Some looked curious. A few looked uncomfortable. She was introduced to the operations team. There were handshakes, short explanations, quick glances. "This is the person who found the timing issue," the leader said simply. No titles, no long praise, just truth. The work began immediately. They sat around smaller tables now, screens pulled close. She explained the fix again, this time in detail. She answered questions patiently. When someone challenged her idea, she welcomed it. They tested everything. Hours passed. She forgot to be nervous. By late afternoon, the first system adjustment was ready to go live. The team watched the dashboard together as the change rolled out. The delay numbers shifted, then dropped. A quiet cheer moved through the room. Someone clapped once, then stopped, embarrassed. She smiled softly, more relieved than proud. As evening approached, the leader returned. "It's working," they said. "Yes," she replied. They studied her for a moment. "I want you to stay," they said. "Not temporary." She froze. "I want to create a role around what you do," they continued. "Someone who questions assumptions. Someone who sees flow, not just volume." She felt overwhelmed. "I need time," she said again. "You'll have it," they replied. "But understand this. You earned your place today." That night, she left the building through the main entrance for the first time. The glass doors opened wide. The city lights reflected off the floor. She paused outside, breathing in the cool air. Her phone buzzed with messages from work she had not yet answered. From people who depended on her wages. From responsibilities waiting at home. She looked back at the building once more. For years, she had walked past places like this, believing they were closed worlds. Today, one had opened. Not because she asked for permission, but because she spoke when it mattered. And inside, the company was already changing. Not just its systems, but how it listened. The days that followed felt unreal to her. Each morning, she walked into the building with a different sense of purpose. She still felt nervous, but it was no longer fear. It was responsibility. People greeted her by name now. They waited for her input. They listened. The system changes rolled out step by step. Each update brought better results. Delays continued to drop. Teams across regions adjusted their schedules. What once felt broken now moved smoothly. The loss that once threatened the company slowly faded into something manageable, then almost invisible. Meetings became calmer. Conversations became clearer. People asked better questions. She noticed something else too. Voices that had once been ignored were now being invited in. Junior staff spoke more freely. Operations workers shared observations without fear. The company had not just fixed a system. It had changed how it listened. One afternoon, she was asked to present the full story of the fix to a larger group. She stood in front of a room filled with people from different departments. No spotlight, no dramatic introduction, just a screen and a simple explanation. She spoke slowly, carefully, making sure everyone could follow. She explained how the problem grew, how it was missed, and how a small shift changed everything. When she finished, there was quiet respect in the room. Someone asked, "Why didn't we see this sooner?" She smiled gently. "Because we were busy looking for complex answers," she said. A few people nodded. Later that week, she was offered a permanent role. Not as a symbol, not as a story to share. As part of the team. The title didn't matter much to her. The work did. She accepted. Her life outside the office began to change too. The long nights grew fewer. The constant worry eased. She could plan again. Not big dreams yet, just steady steps. One evening, as she packed up her desk, she noticed her old uniform folded neatly in a drawer. She paused for a moment, touching the fabric. She didn't feel ashamed of it. It had carried her through hard times. It had brought her to the room where everything changed. She left it there. Months passed. The company released its updated reports. The crisis that once filled headlines quietly disappeared. Investors relaxed. Teams rebuilt trust. No press release mentioned her. And she was okay with that. What mattered was the lesson that stayed. She often thought back to that moment, standing with a tray in her hands, knowing the answer and choosing whether to speak. She knew many others lived in that same space every day. People with ideas, with insight, with answers, but no invitation. Now, she made it her mission to invite them. She encouraged questions. She welcomed challenges. She reminded teams that good ideas do not care about job titles. One afternoon, someone new joined a meeting and hesitated before speaking. She noticed it immediately. "Go ahead," she said gently. The person spoke, and the room listened. That was when she knew the story had truly come full circle. Not because she had changed her life, but because she had helped change a culture. A culture that once nearly lost everything because it failed to listen, and learned just in time that solutions can come from anywhere.